What's up to all my beautiful people? Joey Vantes back for another episode of Fight the Psyops. Thank you guys so much for being here with me. We are growing exponentially. We went from 113K at the top of this year. We're at 134K and growing because of you guys. You see the content, you value it, you've been pushing it, you've been sharing it, we're waking people up, and we are going to turn this thing around. That's what it's all about as we work together. And it's crazy because it's not even just in the US, this is globally. Like, I'm getting messages and DMs and email from people all over the place that are saying, hey, I appreciate you, man, sharing this content. People in Canada, Australia. I've gotten people in South Africa, people in various parts of Europe. So grateful to you guys for everything that you've been doing. I really appreciate it. Some new merch coming. I think you're going to like it. But over the last couple of days, this has been a very eventful week. I've been watching various panels, discussions, keynotes from the World Economic Forum that's taking place here in 2024, that's taking place in Davos, Switzerland. And there's two main points. The number one point that they've put as their agenda focal point is misinformation and disinformation. Now, basically what they're saying is anything that goes against what we're saying, our global agenda to create control globally, to lock things up, to hand over this pandemic treaty of 194 nation states to the World Health Organization, the WHO, Tedros was there speaking today specifically on disease X. They want to hand over this control. They want to lock everything up. They want to create surveillance under the skin. They want to monitor what's in your brain and in your thoughts, like the videos I've shared with you. There's a number of things that they're planning to roll out. They want to create smart cities. They want to depopulate humanity. They want to condense it down because they know that in our numbers, we have power if we figure out how to unite. If we come together, we are an unstoppable force, and they understand that, and they're terrified of it. And they realize that as people are beginning to wake up and become aware to these things, they got to do whatever they can before their time is up, before everybody fully wakes up and we start initiating actions. They have to do something. So this year specifically, not just because it's a US election year, but if you didn't know, I've mentioned this, 40 different major elections happening worldwide. Very important power structure changes that are potentially occurring. And they have to do whatever they can to retain control and power. As I begin to think about this was pretty funny because I was digging through just a number of different books, reading my materials, reading different reports, watching videos, doing the things that I usually do to research and identify topics that are important to present to my audience, to you guys. And, I put everything aside for a minute and I just began to pray. And as a spiritual person, as a Christian, as a believer in Christ, I crack open my Bible and I come to this specific verse that I just wanted to share with you because I felt like it was so relevant. We have power in numbers. And you know who also was terrified of the power of the numbers of the people? Pharaoh. In the book of Exodus, after Joseph had died, it says in Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to the people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us and so go up out of the land. They basically leave. Our laborers go away. Therefore, it says in verse 11, therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. Basically, let's put all of our work on them and consume all their time, take up all their time, so they never have time to be creative, to think, to come together as community, to build power structures among themselves. Like, let's take away all of their time. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. Because what? Pressure makes diamonds, baby. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. And it goes on to talk about them being in bondage. They literally made them into slaves. They made them into slaves, and God rose up Moses to show them, hey, no, there's a way out of this thing. We need to get out of this land and go into the promised land. He pleaded with Pharaoh. He tried to be reasonable. He tried to handle it legally. He tried to handle it with conversation and politicking and working together on a vocal level. And when that no longer took place, the people left and walked away because they stood up in the midst of tyranny and they said, no, we're not going to go along with what you tell us to do anymore. No. They feared for their power, no longer looking at the descendants of Israel and saying, you know what, these are good people. We can work with them. We can work together. We can build this thing up together and be great together. Oh, they want to leave? No, you know what? Hey, these people are becoming more than us. There's too many of them. We're outnumbered. What's the only way that we can control them? Because they might leave or join our enemies and fight against us. So they decided to band together and say, no, we are going to afflict them. We are going to give them labor. We are going to give them rigorous labor. We are going to afflict them with burdens, consuming their time. Think about that today. How much of our time is consumed, whether it be by entertainment, whether it be by the 9 to 5s or 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week people are putting in at their jobs, consumed and inundated with all these burdens and afflictions and stresses and things that they tell us we have to do. So instead of being able to ever get together as a community and build something and say, you know what, let's build our own power structure. No, we're so consumed with, hey, man, these taxes are going up. These interest rates are hiking. Inflation is out of control. I can't even worry about any of that. I have no time. I have to be at work here. I got to work my second job here. I got to go Uber. I got to do this. I got to do that. Consumed and burdened with afflictions, with something that is not even real. Speaking of money, speaking of the valuation that we give to paper, there's no gold even backing it. It's inflated. And we know that the Federal Reserve came in and they control everything the way they do with powers that are even above the president. They can do what they want. They're their own private entity, the centralized banking system that I can talk about and go down that lane, but that'll be for another time. I recommend watching the documentary, The Money Masters, which maybe I'll share at some point. So they lay these afflictions and these burdens upon us to keep us entertained, to keep us consumed, to keep us occupied. And now they realize that people are waking up and seeing it for what it is. And they're power grabbing and they're ready to activate a number of things that they had strategically put in place so that we can't come together and win. So I just want you to see that, because as I started reading all this stuff, going through all these videos, all this information, it became quite simple. They make it so complex, so you have to go in 30 different ways because they have so many different activities and things going on simultaneously, which are strategically attacking us. And we figure, man, if we put the plug in on this one, well, these three are still going. I put the plug here and another one pops up. But when you lean on God and when you turn to God and when we put our focus and our trust back in God and surrender and submit and say, God, you know what? We messed up. We've made mistakes. We've sinned against you. We walked away from you. That's why our nation and our world is the way it is. But we come back and we repent and we submit ourselves back to you. Then we begin to get the power back. We get the favor back. And we begin to take this thing back out of the hands of the enemy. So I wanted to make this specific episode short and sweet, but I'm going to show you a montage of clips. Feel free to take these guys, use them, put them out there on social media, take clips from the show, call in, leave us your messages as well, 323-736-1073. Leave us messages with your takes, with your information, your research, stuff that you've done, maybe topics you want us to cover. Send them in to us. We want to hear from you. Follow, like, hit the bell for notifications so you know when we drop new content. Drop your comments, and we love you guys so much. Continue to fight those psyops. Love you so much. See you soon.
That's why for so long, even the idea that we are not limited and bounded by availability of, let's say, gasoline, petroleum, or coal. Coal now, they won't allow us to use, right? As you know, in COP meeting in Dubai that just ended a day ago, they just physically declared themselves that we should stop using fossil fuel. Basically, petroleum, natural gas, and even coal. I mean, these people are insane now, really insane. I think they're going to harm more people with their own delusion. Plus, they always remember, these are people who actually don't represent the majority. No. Since when are this put up to vote? It's always about this minority, the tyranny of the few, always robbing the whole census, the good census of the good people. This is part of the reason why, as a scientist, I also speak out. Not afraid of anything except for just telling the truth. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to say such thing in your show.
So, I mean, if we haven't been told the truth about where hydrocarbons come from,
Right.
and we haven't, I mean, I've never met a single person in my life who said, wait a second, they're not all fossil fuels, then we keep hearing there's a scientific consensus on climate change. Every scientist believes the same thing about it, believes Al Gore and John Kerry. Maybe that's not true either?
Oh, that I can tell you, please. Thank you for asking that question, Tucker. I've been working on this subject of CO2 causing climate change, or what other factors we can ask that cause climate to change, for close to since my postdoctoral year, 1991, right? So it's about 32 years. And on this question, I think we have a very definitive answer. What we know now is CO2 ain't gonna cost nothing. It's not gonna change much of the climatic system, which means it won't change the speed of the hurricane. It won't change how fast or how frequent tornado form. It won't even actually make any difference to the polar bear population. It's all conservation issue, right, on polar bear. It won't even cause how much fish you don't catch, you know. It won't even cause what they call ocean acidification. It won't even cause this problem that they claim. It's all artificial. Everything they do, it's all dream from their model and the tyranny of the few again. That those few people just dream up this scary story that it just ain't true.
Predictive power, and we have seen the first examples, and your company very much involved into it. But then the next step could be to go into a prescriptive mode, which means you do not even have to have elections anymore, because you can already predict, and afterwards you can say, why do we need elections? Because we know what the result will be.
Let me go back to the number one concern of the Global Risk Report: disinformation and misinformation. Tackling this has been our focus since the very beginning of my mandate. With our Digital Services Act, we defined the responsibilities of large internet platforms on the content they promote and propagate, responsible to children and vulnerable groups targeted by hate speech, but also a responsibility to our societies as a whole. Because the boundary between online and offline is getting thinner and thinner. And the values we cherish offline should also be protected online. And this is even more important in this new era of generative AI. Now, the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report puts artificial intelligence as one of the top potential risks for the next decade.
Last week there was published some really concerning research from China. What the researchers did was they got a virus from a pangolin. That's these charming little creatures that are so abused throughout Eastern Asia particularly. They took a virus from the pangolin and they cultured it in cells in the laboratory. And they then infected mice with it, and it killed all of the mice that had infected through brain infection. So they've generated this new virus that kills 100% of mice it's infected with, but it gets worse. Because the mice that were infected were humanized mice. Now, these are called transgenic mice. In other words, they were given some human genes. And they were given human ACE receptor genes that were expressed by the mouse. So these are essentially human ACE receptors in genes. And it was a coronavirus from the pangolin, and it killed 100% of the mice that were infected. And these are the things that they are jiggling around with in laboratories. This is absolute madness. And it needs to be banned yesterday, as far as I'm concerned.
After we started putting a placeholder, the first that came was in the disease X is COVID. So we have experience now, and we are preparing based on that experience. A lot of assessment has been done. by independent panels and experts. And based on the recommendation, many initiatives we have already started many initiatives. And then the other key, in order to have better prepared and to address the disease X, is the pandemic agreement. The pandemic agreement can bring all the experience, all the challenges that we have faced, and all the solutions into one. And that agreement can help us to prepare for the future in a better way, because this is about a common enemy. And without a shared response, starting from the preparedness, we will face the same problem as COVID. And deadline for the pandemic agreement is May 2024, and member states are negotiating. This is between countries, and I hope they will deliver this pandemic agreement by that time.
The British government has unveiled a new vaccine research facility where scientists are working to prevent future pandemics. It's located at Portendown, a high-security research facility best known for its work on chemical warfare. Experts are preparing for what is known as Disease X, or the next pandemic virus. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes was given rare access to the facility.
The delicate task of protecting the nation's health. This is one of the laboratories at Portendown where scientists are analysing current threats, new variants of COVID, for example, and trying to identify new ones. Inside these purpose-built labs, more than 200 scientists working for the UK Health Security Agency are helping to develop and test vaccines against a range of diseases. It's vital work to keep us all safe.
We've got in many respects the toughest job in the world, which is to protect health against infectious diseases and environmental hazards. And it is tough because we know that the risks of new and emerging infections, including those of pandemic potential, is increasing.
For decades, scientists at Portendown have been involved in medical research, as well as the work on chemical and biological warfare, for which the centre is perhaps better known. During the pandemic, laboratories like this one played an absolutely vital role in assessing how effective the vaccines were in combating the coronavirus, and that work continues today. But as well as monitoring how effective existing vaccines are against new COVID variants, the new Vaccine Development and Evaluation Centre is looking at emerging threats for which no vaccine yet exists. One of those is Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, a virus that is spread by the bite of an infected tick and is fatal in about 30% of cases. A serious outbreak occurred in Afghanistan in 2017, but the disease is widespread across Africa, Asia, the Middle East and the Balkans. Changes to climate and the way we live mean viruses like this one could find a way to the UK. But equally, the next pandemic could be caused by a virus that has yet to be identified, what experts call Disease X. Dangers known and unknown. These scientists will be working to make sure we're prepared for both. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Portendown.
Well, on that very issue of Disease X, I've been speaking to Professor Dame Jenny Harries. She's the Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency. And I asked her how scientists prepare for a threat when they don't know what that threat is.
So that is the challenge which I think you heard our Chief Scientific Officer, Professor Isabel Oliver, describe. But there are a number of steps that we can take. We can be better prepared in terms of surveillance, and we're doing that work separately. But what we do in the UKHSA labs at Portendown, which is separate, I might say, from the Ministry of Defence facilities for chemical warfare, is get ourselves ready both to isolate the new pathogens, to develop assays so that we can test them accurately, and to work with other partners, with academics and with pharmaceutical companies to test out prototypes for vaccines and then be ready to evaluate them. And the really exciting thing about the legacy from the pandemic is we now have 2,800 square metres of laboratory space we didn't have before, and we're using that as part of our new strategy to ensure we're as best prepared as we can be for new pathogens and some existing ones.
What would you say is the most important lesson that was learned from the pandemic?
So I think I was going to say partnership was the immediate work that comes to mind, and that's obviously we see that when we work with our directors of public health, for example, in responding to all sorts of infectious disease and chemical and radiological incidents. But actually it applies very much to working with industry as well. The Vaccine Task Force was the group which originally supported this investment in laboratory space at Porton Down at the UKHSA site there. And it is that continuing work which we are planning to continue going forward so that we are ready working together as soon as a pathogen appears, and actually obviously beforehand, so we're prepping as fast as we can.
There is that target of being able to deploy hopefully a vaccine within 100 days of the threat being identified. How close are you to that particular target, to making that realistic?
So that is an ambition, so to get from an identified pathogen to a vaccine and to therapeutics within 100 days. I mean, to put it in context, that's about a third of the time that it took us to get a COVID vaccine into people's arms, and that was an outstanding record. Usually it takes about 5 to 10 years for a new vaccine to come through. So it is a really challenging ambition, and it won't work for all viruses and bacteria. Some are different shapes, some are more difficult to incorporate quickly. But I do think it is possible for many.